Well, welcome. Tonight, we're getting a view from the Senate. We have our senator here representing us in Boston, and we're going to learn all the good things he's been doing. Why don't we start with an introduction in case there's somebody who doesn't know you?
Well, Al, as always, it's good to see you, and thank you for having me on your show. I'm Ryan Fattman. I am the state senator for what's known as the Worcester-Norfolk District, which includes 14 communities total, about 165,000 people. And Milford, the center of the universe, is of course one of those wonderful communities.
How do you get around, never mind know, 14 towns?
Well, truth be told, as you're aware, and no one else is that's watching, I was a little bit late to this program tonight because I was coming from Ann Fields' retirement party. Ann Fields was the director of the library in Hopedale, wonderful woman, served 10 years. And these are the types of events we get invited to all the time, which are really a pleasure to participate in and to enjoy. And after this show tonight, we'll be heading over to St. Mary's Church and participating in an Eagles ceremony for a young man in town, Josh Hearn. So we're looking forward to, being there for them. And yeah, when you have 14 communities and 14 different Eagle Scout troops and libraries and schools and select boards, it can be a lot. Time management is a really important thing, especially, I have a young family, a wonderful wife, and, so I want to make sure they also get a little bit of representation at home. You got to make sure
Stephanie doesn't realize how far down she married, how lucky you were.
Exactly. I need to stick around a bit, but, it's a joy, and I enjoy the job. I love meeting the people, and we're just getting started here at the beginning of the legislative session. We got sworn in on January 2nd, the first Wednesday of the month, and started filing our bills and doing all the work that's necessary for the coming years.
So now, walk people through, because I'm always amazed at how much time you have from the beginning of the session to when the bills have to be filed.
Oh yeah, I know.
You can take it easy, relax.
So it's better when you're a little bit of a veteran. I can imagine when Brian Murray was coming in for the first time a term ago, it was quite a shock to learn he had 2 weeks to file all of his bills for the next 2 years. And essentially we had to get those done by almost 3 Fridays ago now. And the good news is we've been working on legislation over the course of the last few years. This is obviously my 3rd term, so I'm entering my 5th year in the state Senate. So we got it down like clockwork. The challenge actually now for us is looking and reviewing all the bills that we wish to co-sponsor. Because after you file all your legislation in those first 2 weeks, and to help people at home understand what that means. So when you file the legislation, the way the rules work with the legislative process, every bill, every legislative piece of information has to go through a hearing process. Every bill has to have 3 hearings before it actually becomes law. And so that first step is filing legislation, getting it to its committee, and then the committee has a hearing that people who are in favor or against can testify. And then the committee votes on whether to pass it through to the next hearing and the next process. So that's the background. But after we file legislation, everybody who has filed then sends out all their bills and says, hey, would you take a look at this and read through it and see if it makes sense to you and co-sponsor it, add your name, and you have 2 weeks to do that. So essentially the first month of you being in office is really a giant research project. In addition to going to events and saying hello to people, you have to really understand what sort of legislation is being filed.
Now give us an idea, order of magnitude. You file 1 or 2 bills, you read 4 or 5?
Yeah, no, it's quite an endeavor. And the thing that's tough is trying to balance the modes of information that are coming in. So you have advocacy groups that are contacting you, asking you to co-sponsor things. You have constituents who
how many bills did you file?
Between the amount of bills I filed and co-sponsored, there's about 130. And so there's about 5,000 total that were filed.
So that's what I'm trying to get, I joke around saying you got 2 or 3, but there's thousands that somehow you've got to get through.
Yeah.
Read and figure out, is this something I even want to put my name on.
Yeah, and there's things, honestly, we have to shelve. You know, there's ideas that look really tantalizing and interesting, and the bill is 120 pages. And I've got 2 weeks, you know, to get through this, and I'm like, I'm not going to be able to get through 120 pages if I want to try to get through everything else. And so you have to really, time management is a principle that can't be lost on anybody.
And in between reading, you've got to drive to 14 towns to get to everybody's events.
Right, and say hello. And you know, it can be a challenge. It's also an opportunity. You get to, you know, come to Milford and you go to Cafe Sorrento in the downtime, you know, and get a little bit of food, or you know, you get to go to that new Red Heat place.
So, we tried that already.
Yeah, pretty good.
You know, it's funny because the hospital does that fundraiser, Taste of the Towns.
Yes, yep.
And it actually worked because we went there.
Yeah. Oh, no
and
kidding.
Tasted Red Heat before it was open.
Yep.
And then we were like, we got to go try this place. So down we went.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, that's a wonderful event up at the Portuguese Club there, right? Yeah.
And this year was down at the Myriad.
Oh, yes.
It's always been at the Portuguese Club, and this year they shifted it to the Myriad. I don't know where it'll be next year, but it'll be one of the two places.
Yeah. Well, as you travel around, you get acquainted to these places, and that's an opportunity not just to meet the people, but the institutions. And one of the institutions that I've come to know, I'm a corporator, is the Milford Regional Hospital. You know, just a fantastic institution. About a week ago, we were there the other night for the corporators meeting, and you know, learning from some of the different doctors about the research projects that they've undertaken, and what a phenomenal facility and what brilliant people that work there.
So now, you've got 2 weeks.
Yes.
You're going to put your name on 100 pieces of paper out of 5,000.
Approximately. It depends. Every session is different. Sometimes there's new ideas. For example, you know, one of the new ideas that, I'm not sure it's really a new idea, but it's at least a new initiative, is that we're going to try to put in AEDs into every single first responder vehicle in the Commonwealth. And that comes from a situation that happened back in June 2017 when the Greenwood family in the town of Mendon lost their father David and their husband David. You know, he was an athlete, somebody who liked to run and exercise, and the daughter Erica had come home and found her dad slumped over his bike. He had just got back from a bike ride, and she called 911. She was an EMT herself, and she was surprised when the police officers showed up that they didn't have an AED. He had gone through a cardiac incident. And as she knew, and as anybody who knows about cardiac arrest and cardiac incidents, if you don't have that AED in that situation.
Now tell people what an AED.
The panels, right?
Okay.
So people know. Automatic.
It doesn't matter, but everybody knows the clear bump.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, essentially just some research. If you're able to apply an AED within the first minute of someone having a cardiac arrest, the chances of survival can be as high as 85%, which is a pretty great thing. But every minute after that, it's a precipitous drop. So if you don't apply those panels, the AED, after a minute, you start dropping off at a rate of 30, 40, 50%. And after about 4 or 5 minutes, it's very difficult. So our thought is, in communities like ours, the Blackstone Valley Extended, Milford, Southbridge, a lot of times when people show up that are police officers, they are your first responders. And they should be equipped with AEDs in case they come across a situation where that's necessary. And so we're working with the Greenwood family. They've set up a nonprofit. I believe it's called 617 Heart, and that's the day that their father and husband passed away, June 17th. And so we've been working with them to try to and the American Heart Association. And so this is an idea that I filed. Brian Murray is co-sponsored. We're working together in a bipartisan manner, trying to figure out how we're going to fund this. There's an AED trust fund. One thought is maybe we take you know, a fee of about 25 cents on rental vehicles and put that into the trust fund. And when someone comes and rents a vehicle in Massachusetts, 25 cents would go into this trust fund, and over the course of maybe 5 years, in a rotating basis, towns that do not have AEDs in their police vehicles would be able to get funding for those, and we would be able to perhaps...
How much are these things?
They're about $1,000. They range from, depending on the brand, depending on the quality, somewhere between $700 and $1,500. There's a maintenance cost, probably they have to be changed out every 3 to 5 years, depending again on the brand. And the wonderful thing is there's a lot of families that have dedicated their lives because of a sad tragedy to making sure that these are in schools, that these are in public safety vehicles, that they're publicly available. Some laws already exist, they have to be in gyms, for example. Like if you're working out at a gym, Planet Fitness, whatever it might be, you probably see an AED on the wall. That's the state law. But there's no law that says, first responder vehicles have to have them.
But then why wouldn't we just want them in every police car?
Yeah, no, I think we do. I think that makes sense.
I guess the reaction I'm having is we've got 12 cruisers.
Mm-hmm.
That's a whopping, for top of the line, $18,000.
Right.
I mean, not that $18,000 isn't important.
Right.
But out of $100+ million budget,
yeah.
Why hasn't somebody come to the town and said?
Well, the good news is in our area, and this is attributable to the Greenwood family. There's a lot of Milford's all set. You have AEDs in your vehicles.
Okay.
Mendon is all set, and that's largely because of the Greenwood family. They've raised money, they've had golf tournaments, they've purchased these, and they've given them to the police officers. They've also done that in Hopedale. I actually got to participate in a ceremony with their family as they described what had happened that day and gifted the chief and the town administration.
But I'm still stunned, Ryan, because you think about it. We just spent $750,000 putting in a local SWAT type response team.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember looking at Chris Moore and both of us saying, can you imagine if we don't vote for this and something happens?
Yeah.
So I start thinking about $18,000. It's a lot of money, but how would you look at your neighbor saying, we let this go?
Yeah.
We saved $18,000 and lost your father.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. A lot of people just assume these are in vehicles.
Well, so I'm saying, why didn't somebody come?
Right.
Now, Milford, we have them.
Yeah.
But if we didn't, just come to us and say, look, guys, look what we're risking.
Yeah.
Look who we're risking.
Yep.
For a nominal amount of money. I mean, we spend that on fireworks every year.
Right. Yeah, no, and that's just a luxury. This is a necessity safety item and something that can bring people back to life. And I've actually seen that over the course of my legislative career. In 2011, when I first got elected into the state house, there was 2 stories that had happened just kind of parallel to one another. A young man named Michael L. Sesser had passed away on the football field with my brother. I've told this story, I think, on your show before, and it was November 15th, 2010. About 3 or 4 weeks later, Tyler Symes from Millville, I believe he was in Milford or somewhere in this area, got hit with a hockey puck.
Yes.
And went into a cardiac arrest type moment. And they had moved the AED from one arena to another, and they applied the AED within less than a minute. And he's here today well and fine. And so you had these 2 stories, which one, there was an AED in that school locked up in the building. And it's like, what a difference that could have made if it was moved out to the field and could have been applied. Michael may still be here. And so, the same thing is true of David. What would have happened, and no one likes to Monday morning quarterback these things, but what would have happened if there was an AED in that police vehicle? And this should never happen again. And so the Greenwood family from Mendon has dedicated their lives, Jessica, Erica, their mom, Denise, and
so what would your bill do?
As well. It would require that AEDs be in all first responder vehicles.
And provide a funding mechanism.
Correct, yeah. And so that's where the whole idea of this was talking about new ideas and initiatives, legislation. So we're now promoting that because on Friday this week, that ability to co-sponsor a bill like that shuts down. And so people can't lend their name to support. So I think right now we got like 15, 16 co-sponsors on it. We're working with the American Heart Association. They're trying to promote it as well. A woman named Allison Perron. And hopefully we'll work
Now,
to make
when
this
you
law.
co-sponsor a bill, are you hoping that by having 16 senators on there, the rest of the senators may be more likely to go along with it, or?
Yeah, I think it's first an establishment that I've read this, and in principle, I agree with what they're trying to achieve. Good example is Chapter 70 reform right now. The Chapter 70 funding formula for education, has been proposed for the last several sessions. Sonia Chang Diaz is the person that has proposed it. I am quite certain that she has 40 senators that have all sponsored it. That's 100%.
I was going to say, now let me understand. If you have 40 co-sponsors,
Yep.
do you still take a vote?
Well, yeah, we do. It goes through the process. And last session, it actually passed through the Senate 40-0. I, in principle, agree with that bill. I think that there needs to be changes made to the funding formula. The devil is always in the details, and there's a few things in there that I might want to change. Some of the ratios about healthcare spending and whatnot. I think there needs to be a higher concentration on out-of-school placements and also on special education reimbursement, because in particular, there's towns like Sutton and Douglas and Hopedale that I represent, Mendon, and probably Milford as well, that when there's a special needs student that moves into the district, that can be a very costly thing. The town is obligated by federal law in order to educate that individual. We believe in a free and open society and opportunity for all, which is great. But there is a cost to it, and the state, I think, has really shirked its responsibility in picking up those costs. And so, the devil is in the details. We have to get to a final bill. Last time that this bill came forward, the House had their version, the Senate had their version. Both passed almost unanimously, I believe, in both houses. It got to the final conference committee, 3 members of the House, 3 members of the Senate, trying to work out the differences, and it died on the table. And so once again, this is one of those issues that there's broad consensus on trying to change, but how you get there and how you actually get things done is what matters. And so in the Senate version of the bill, for example, ELL students, which Milford has had its fair share of over the course of the last few years.
Fair share?
Yeah. Relative to other towns in
Right.
this area. It would have actually given more money in the Senate version of the bill than the House version of the bill. But the House version of the bill probably would have worked out better for towns like Mendon, Upton, which have regional school transportation issues, and Milford doesn't necessarily have that. So it's always a balancing act and trying to figure out what is best for the communities that you represent, which is why you attach your name to a bill. And it's also trying to figure out, what do you personally believe? Because sometimes there'll be people who aren't with you on an issue that you represent. And if you think it's the right thing, you try to pursue that. I think one of those issues for me, and I think that there is broad consensus, but there's some people who don't agree with this position. Making sure that we protect our police officers. Everyone agrees with that, right? But how we protect our police officers.
Do you love your mother?
Right. How we protect our police officers is often a subject to debate. And what I mean by that is our laws, right? So one of the laws that I've put out there is if you fire at a police officer, it should be a mandatory 10 years in jail, period. The intent is to kill. Right now,
Isn't
the law.
that attempted murder?
It is attempted murder. And right now, the law says you're guaranteed 5 years. I don't think that that's enough. Personally, I would go further. I would make it 20 years. But I don't think that there's necessarily an appetite for that amongst the entire legislature. And I don't know why. I don't really understand that perspective. But to find consensus, we did pass this.
We're asking somebody to increase the probability they'll get shot at.
Yeah, exactly.
While they protect your son, your daughter, my grandson, my granddaughter. And how can I not want to do everything in my power to protect? I mean, I'm pretty proud of Milford's police.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
We've had 2 demonstrations in Milford.
In support of them.
In support.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I've talked to friends across the country, and they find it hard to believe that we actually had 2 demonstrations, both supporting it while you're reading in the paper.
Yeah.
The exact opposite in many communities.
Right. And so, the idea of mandatory minimums is something that some people don't agree with. And they don't agree with it from a logistical standpoint. They think that judges' hands shouldn't be tied. There's a valid point. But, when you fire at a police officer, I think there should be a minimum threshold of what that person goes to jail and how long they go to jail for. The same thing is true of assault and battery on a police officer. We passed this in the criminal justice reform. If you do bodily injury to a police officer, a first responder, firefighter, whatever it might be, EMT, you go to jail for a year. That to me is
That's it?
Yeah, exactly, right? It's an appropriate sentence.
So if I sneak up
I would
on a
like
cop
it to be more.
and beat him up, let's say I have the ability, and I beat him up, I'm going to go away for a whole year?
And it used to be that there was nothing, no guarantee of anything. And that a lot of times people were assaulting police officers and they were actually getting off. They were pleading on to other cases or other charges, pleading down that one and getting charged with something else. So it's just, now you can't plead down on that because it's a 1-year mandatory minimum. There perhaps should be others. Another, thing that I think drives me nuts a bit is if you are caught with a illegal firearm, there's a 1-year mandatory minimum. That charge always gets dropped. The DAs never pursue it. There's illegal guns all the time that are confiscated by police officers, and the charges always get dropped.
Okay, maybe you can help me understand. When you say there's a mandatory minimum 1 year.
Yep, for having an unregistered firearm.
But then, why is there a choice? Is it they don't pursue it at all?
They don't pursue it at all. They drop the charges. They usually negotiate that out. And this is how I say there's debates on how do we keep our police and our public safety officials free. I'm sorry, not free, safe.
Safe.
And, another issue that we've filed, which we think, is a good approach on public safety, is mandatory dangerousness hearings. So what is a dangerousness hearing? If I commit a crime, I am, the DA has the ability to look at my criminal history and say this person's dangerous.
I've been arrested, and in the past I've been shooting at people.
Yep. And they can then take that and go to a judge and say, instead of releasing this person.
Don't put them on the street.
Right. Let's keep this person and put them in a cell. And that's what essentially a dangerousness hearing calls for. Okay. Are they dangerous, and should we hold on to that person? But there's two problems with this. When it gets to the judge, you're not allowed to look back at the previous criminal history. The DA can see it, but the judge is not allowed to, because under our law and our system, everybody is innocent until proven guilty. That a principle applies to this dangerousness hearing, and you can't look back at their previous crimes.
So we have an axe murderer here who's charged with swinging an axe at somebody. Mm-hmm. And when you say, Judge, he or she has done this 6 times before.
Yep.
There's good odds number 7 is coming, and you can't say that?
You can't, but knowing that they swung an axe this time and that's why they were charged, I would say it's very likely the judge is going to look at that situation and say, no, he had a dangerous weapon, we're going to hold him, there'll be a dangerousness hearing and it will be successful. But there's also a component where someone who has a previous dangerous history, and this time it was breaking and entering. And so now the judge isn't able to look back at that, and the judge is just judging whether or not the breaking and entering makes this person dangerous. And that's where it gets to be kind of confusing.
Isn't that why we appoint judges, to show common sense and be the arbitrators?
Yes, but depending on your opinion, and for me, it's an unfortunate circumstance that they can't look back at that. So this is something we're trying to change. We want the judges to be able to legally look back at the criminal history of the individual when they come forward for a dangerousness hearing. That way we can keep the public safe and the police and our first responders.
I want the judge to be as well informed,
right,
and not make a decision in a vacuum.
Yeah. Well, people are entitled to their constitutional rights, and that has been decided by the Supreme Judicial Court of our state, that you are not allowed to look back at the person's previous criminal history. Not something I necessarily agree with, but that is the law.
I don't understand.
And people are trying to change that law. I'm one of them. Another thing with dangerousness hearings, because I said that there was 2 components, a DA doesn't have to bring one forward. So if someone is swinging that axe, they don't have to say, oh, let's have a dangerousness hearing. Now, if they don't do it, there's probably
the person walks.
The person could leave and not show up for their
Well,
next court date.
post a bail and
Yep.
go out and swing the axe again.
Exactly. But back to the DA, they don't have to bring a dangerousness hearing forward. I have a bill that would require a dangerousness hearing if they are previously convicted of some sort of dangerous crime, rape, murder, any one of these things, assault and battery, having an illegal firearm. Those types of things are very serious infractions, and they should be having a dangerousness hearing for that person. If you remember, there was a guy, I believe his name was Anthony Zambrino. He killed the police officer, Ron Tarantino.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if his first name was Anthony, but Zambrino, I believe, was the perpetrator's name, the murderer. And he had committed a bunch of different crimes previously. He was arrested. He was out on bail, personal reconnaissance, and he killed the police officer while he was out on bail. And so there should have been, in my opinion, a dangerousness hearing for that individual, and that person should not have been driving around walking the streets. And it wasn't, so this would require the DA to have a dangerousness hearing if they had a previous criminal history. And if they did not have a dangerous criminal history and they chose not to have a dangerousness hearing, even though they were doing something dangerous in the crime, the DA would have to write the reason why they chose not to do that, which currently they don't have to. The reason why I am putting this idea forward is to create accountability.
Sure.
DAs are elected. Their assistant district attorneys are the people who usually are prosecuting these cases. I'm sure that the DA knows about many of them. But if the ADA knows that he's accountable to the DA and knows that his boss is elected and perhaps that his job is dependent upon that, I would think that the ADA is going to think twice about not having a dangerousness hearing if they have to write the reason why they're not holding it, or if they see that there's a previous criminal history there and they're like...
Well, if nothing else, forcing you to write down your logic.
Right.
Then it becomes public record.
Right, exactly.
And when your election comes up, you should be proud of the decisions you made.
Yep.
Or not so proud of the decisions you didn't make.
And that's where the accountability in our system exists. And that's where I think that this law makes a lot of sense. And so actually we've got some support from the Mass Chiefs Association on this bill. We've asked them to review it. The initial impression is very positive. They were positive last session. We brought this up during the budget debate and tried to pursue it then. Unfortunately, we couldn't get it anywhere. But this is going to have a public hearing. This is going to have people's ability to come in and testify in favor of it. I don't see how it doesn't get through the Public Safety Committee and then go through the process.
What would the opposition use against it? We want axe murderers free to...
I don't know. I'm not really sure I would understand the logic. I mean, perhaps there's a constitutional right component of it, not necessarily with the mandatory dangerousness, but with the look back and, equality under the law. But, I tend to think that if you've committed a crime that's dangerous and egregious, you've sacrificed a lot of your ability to, kind of blur out the previous mistakes.
For me to accept the fact that you want all your rights when you've just taken a gun or a knife to somebody and taken away theirs.
Yeah, exactly.
But then again, we've had the discussion where I couldn't understand why I can have an EBT card and not have my picture on it.
Well, you can't anymore.
But look how long that took.
Right.
Yet, if I wanted to get on an airplane, I could have argued all day long. And I don't think you can get on an airplane anymore without a government. They told me even Massachusetts I had to get a new driver's license because it's got to be
Real ID.
Real ID.
And you need 4 forms of identification. So my wife just had her birthday. She just turned 31. Happy birthday, honey. If you're watching, probably not. And she showed up with 3 forms of ID. She couldn't get her Real ID. She got a Massachusetts license. But in 2020, October, I believe, you will not be able to fly on a plane without a Real ID. You can fly if you have a passport.
Yes.
But that's domestic. you'll need that pass. If you don't have a real ID, you will have to fly with your passport as well domestically in the United States.
4 forms of ID.
Yep.
My passport.
Birth certificate.
Boy, that's impressive. That has no picture. Okay, birth certificate.
Birth certificate. You can have like a firearms license.
Oh, my FID card.
FID card. I'm pretty sure your current Massachusetts license would count as one. And you can bring, I believe, it doesn't have to have your photo ID on it. You can have like a statement, for like a bank statement that has your social security number on it, that has your address on it. You can have a utility bill, but you can't just bring a utility bill and say, I'm here. You have to have 4 forms of identification. And it is a high threshold. One of the things I'd remind people, though, is just the world we're living in. It's good to have a real ID. It's good to have a high threshold for these types of things because, the United States, we're living in a global economy. We're living in a world that still has terrorism.
Go on an airplane.
Yep.
It's annoying to have to get in line.
Yep.
It's annoying to take my shoes off. It's annoying, annoying, annoying. But aren't I very happy that it is that
Safe.
high of a threshold?
Yeah, I would think so.
Do I want to take my kids on a plane that there's been no security?
Right. Yeah, I'd say it can be a little bit inconvenient. I've done it, and I've also been pulled aside and apparently looked pretty scary and frisked and whatnot and had my bags gone through and taken out. But, that reassures me that when I'm getting on that plane, I'm going to get to my destination, and that's what I want.
Yeah, that used to be my suitcase. I let one hotel put a sticker on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, as soon as one sticker got on, I had all sorts of stickers. And I was wondering why I always got pulled out when I'd go to Ben Gurion in Israel. Mm-hmm. Then I looked at my bag, and there's a Iraqi sticker, a Syrian sticker, a Saudi. Every Arab country's got a sticker on it, and they're looking at me like,
Yeah.
You're drawing enough suspicion here just from.
Right.
But again, at the end, yes, I can growl and snarl over 5 minutes of inconvenience. But I felt kind of good when I got off the plane in the same configuration with the same number of pieces that God gave me.
Yep.
That they did have that security.
And it's gotten a lot better. They've done a lot. They've become much more efficient. So that's a good thing for all of us. Logan Airport has become a fantastic institution and a very safe place to travel through. So that's, really, really proud.
So any other new and exciting bills coming through?
Well, one new and exciting thing for me personally is I've been appointed to 2 committees, sort of within the own structure of the legislature. There's a leadership structure. In my own caucus, I'm now ranked number 2. So I've been elevated a little
congratulations.
bit. Yeah, which is nice. It gives me more responsibility legislatively. Have to carry more debate on the floor of the Senate, which is fun. And I just got done doing that in this past week. We had our first debate. So, sort of process, right? File your bills, co-sponsor your bills, then we create the rules. The rules are the rules of the road. It's the very first debate that we have. In order to achieve the filing of legislation, you have to have rules. So we're using the rules from the previous session. So we create new ones. Some of the new rules that I either sponsored or co-sponsored, which I think are good, are no non-disclosure agreements on taxpayer money. So what does that mean? Last year, it was revealed, unfortunately, that there was taxpayer-funded non-disclosure agreement settlements of sexual assault in Congress and in the State House.
Yeah, in the State House also.
Correct. Basically, taxpayer money being used as hush money to make sexual assaults or
go away.
And that's unacceptable. Not only is it unacceptable, it's disgusting. And so, we passed a rule in the Senate that says these can't exist. Under no circumstance can somebody go through, who's an elected official, have a non-disclosure agreement that's taxpayer funded or privately funded. They don't exist in the Massachusetts State Senate. I think that's a really strong step in the right direction to instill public confidence, to know that their elected officials are trying to do the right thing and not using their position of power to prey on people. Unfortunately, that was happening in the state Senate. And it made a lot of news. We have a new Senate president because the Senate president's husband was doing that. And so, unfortunately, it's, I think, a step in the right direction, but it's because of a sad history that we had to live through. And I co-sponsored it with a woman who went through one of those situations.
Wow.
She was a state rep's aide that got into a situation which I don't really want to get into, but it actually catapulted her because she used that story. She was the victim in the case to run for the State House of Representatives and now to run for the State Senate, and successfully. And that's a wonderful thing, Unfortunately, it came from a bad situation, but she, used that lemon and turned it into lemonade, if you will.
But it's hard for me to understand, because your daughter, if you don't want her treated this way,
Right.
how could you treat somebody else's daughter?
Right.
Or son, today is probably the same, both sides of the fence.
Yeah.
But I don't have any kids. Well, you got a wife. I'm not married. Did you have a mother?
Right. Yeah.
Somewhere there's a common thread that there should be some decency. And using my tax money to hide it?
Yeah. It's crazy. And it shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen in Congress. Unfortunately, I think it still does. And the only exception, as I said, it's for elected officials, is if the victim wanted a non-disclosure, that they could choose to do that to protect them. And that's something that I fully support. The victim should have that right.
No, if you've
question.
never been a victim, you can't know. So you
Right.
got to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yep, exactly. But this is part of that rules debate that I was talking about. We create the rules of the Senate. There are 66 rules that the Senate has. They're as simple as, calling a caucus to take a timeout in the middle of a debate so that, your respective teams can talk and strategize, to as complex as legislative maneuvers and how many people need to stand to get a roll call vote being a recorded vote of the Senate. One of the amendments that a rule that I put forward that didn't pass, unfortunately, was no tax increases in an informal session. So we have these formal and formal sessions. Formal sessions are all members of the legislature that show up and you take recorded votes. Informal sessions are supposed to be, the legislature is required by law, by the Constitution, to meet every 72 hours. So every 72 hours, the legislature needs to meet. And sometimes after 1, 2, 3 days of formal sessions goes by, the legislature won't meet in a formal session until the next week. But it's required, if you stop on Thursday, to meet on Monday. And so they have an informal session. When they do that, usually there's 3 or 4 members that show up, maybe 5. And
5 out of 40?
5 out of 40. And legislative business happens. Usually it's non-controversial stuff. For example, a liquor license. If somebody in town is applying for a liquor license, there are a few people doing that right now, and it's approved by the legislature, it's gone through the process,
But don't you have to have a quorum?
Well, that's what's so interesting. The rules say that you do need a quorum, but only if someone objects. So the rules...
So if they question the quorum...
So if I question the quorum in an informal session, everything shuts down. So that's part of the rules. And that makes every individual there very powerful. I actually did this at the end of December because there was a bill coming forward that I wasn't very happy about. And unfortunately, it did become law, and this is why I proposed the rule. You've probably heard of Airbnb, HomeAway, VRBO, HomeShare. All of these are websites that have taken people's personal homes, condos.
They made them hotels.
What's that?
They made them a hotel or a motel.
Exactly. And so there was a short-term rental tax that was coming through to be levied on this, but there's multiple tiers on that tax, and I didn't agree with how it was done. And so one day I stopped it to try to make it better. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to really make it better, and it was able to pass. But that's how you use the rules to your advantage. And even as a member of the minority party in Massachusetts, if you know the rules and you use them well, you can actually have the high ground. Not just morally, like sometimes I think I do, but from a strategic standpoint. And using the rules is a really important thing. So I'm the ranking member of the Rules Committee for the minority in the state Senate. So anything that's now filed, we've talked about filing those bills in the first 2 weeks. Any bill filed after that goes straight to the Rules Committee. And the Rules Committee decides whether or not you want to release a bill. And being on there, that gives me the power to get bills out that need that.
So if I miss the deadline, I can still submit bills?
You can, but they could also go nowhere. So they go right to the Rules Committee, and it takes the membership of the Rules Committee in the Senate or in the House to release the bill. So for example, we had a bill in Uxbridge. They wanted to change their charter to allow for recall elections. They didn't have that in their charter. So I filed the bill late because we were outside the window to file, and we had to get it out of rules and work with the chairman. That's why these relationships in the legislature matter. And being on that committee now, that gives me the ability to help move it myself, which is a really, I think, good thing for the towns that I represent, especially when local bills come through, which we get all the time. Town meeting will file bills. You know, for example, the water company here in town, that all was happening in a late filed manner. So we had to get first, as a first step, that bill out of rules and into the legislature as normal business. The second committee I just found out yesterday that I will be appointed to is the Ways and Means Committee.
Oh, that little not known committee.
Yes. Yeah. Though
Congratulations. I mean, that's got to be the top of the top.
It is. Yeah. It's considered the most powerful committee in the legislature. I said to my wife, I came home and I said, honey, I know that I've been out a lot at night. I've been put on this committee, and now I'll be traveling a lot more too, because one of the things that Ways and Means does, in addition to writing the entire budget, which this year is going to be somewhere between $41 and $43 billion, is we go and have public hearings across the state. There's usually one in every county, sometimes two, and we've got 12 counties, or 14 counties, if you include Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard.
Martha's Vineyard.
So the Ways and Means Committee goes to all the counties and has these public hearings, usually at night. And so I'll now be on that committee and helping write the Senate version of the budget and having my input. I won't be the ranking member, but I'll be one of the members.
Yeah, but you're at the table.
I'm at the table. And I think that can benefit my own district just from a resource standpoint and trying to advocate to get communities the funding that they need for different projects.
I mean, I would think if you're on the Ways and Means, I'm going to be a little more sensitive to what you're asking me to do, because one way or another, I'm going to need your help on something.
Right. Yep.
So that sounds fantastic.
Yeah, I was angling for that committee, to be honest, and I was very, very gratified to see that I was
There's probably
appointed
39 other people angling for the committee at the same time.
There's a lot of people, for sure, but I was fortunate enough to be appointed, and I'm looking forward to serving on it.
That's exciting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, at this point of the year, we're all thinking of one thing, budget. Maybe then we think
I thought you were
of
going to say the Patriots.
Well, no, now that's behind us.
Yeah.
But the budget, how are we doing? Because I read $5 billion loss in the pension fund.
Yeah. Well, I think it depends on how you look at things. So there's two different theories. One theory is that everything's fine. Operationally, we're within our budget. There's really nothing to worry about. There's another theory that says, well, there's a storm a-brewing. So the revenue numbers that came in for the month of January were down $400 million. The month before that, it was about, I believe, 87 million. So we know that there's been volatility in the stock market. Some of this comes from capital gains. Capital gains has been low. But because of the federal tax reform that happened over a year ago, a lot of people think that this isn't a big deal because it's all about schedules and paying taxes as opposed to the actual collection of them. And so, or I should say the actual collection of them.
But last year, so many people were in a hurry to prepay everything.
Their salt taxes.
I mean, I was amazed. I went down to town hall.
Yep.
And I wanted to pay the year in advance.
Right.
And they said, well, we can take 2 quarters, but...
And some towns wouldn't even take 2 quarters.
Is that right?
Some towns would only take 1, yeah.
Because I said,
So
wait a minute,
consider
you should
yourself
take
lucky.
my money. And
Yep.
he said, can only take money for this fiscal year.
Yep. So for people listening at home, I mentioned the SALT tax. That's the state and local tax. And essentially, you could write off your property taxes and your state income taxes against your federal tax liability. And, so last December, and I think we talked about this, I went and wrote a check because this December, you can't do it.
Right.
And it's essentially been nullified from federal tax reform. And so there was a rush of people to do this, which inflated the revenue numbers because all of a sudden we were $848 million ahead of the benchmark. And people were like, whoa.
But that was just cash flow.
Exactly.
I mean,
And
when,
so the
when I
question
got my
now-
notice in April
Yeah.
or June, it was like, yeah, so what? April. I didn't pay anything because I already paid it last December.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, it was kind of a false
Yeah.
inflation
It was
of
inflated,
numbers.
without question. People were trying to take advantage of the tax law, and so they ran and
That
wrote the
was
check.
it.
And that's how it happened. And it inflated the revenue numbers. So now there's question about losses on capital gains and all that, and are people withholding paying taxes, which is why revenue is down because they're carrying it. And they're carrying some of those losses, which they're allowed to do. And, is that doing the exact opposite, where we thought we were taking in a lot more back in December, January a year ago. This December and January, we're looking at a lot less, but it's really not as bad as it looks. And so those are the two theories. I'm on the Revenue Committee, which has the Commissioner of Revenue come before us and give us a clear picture. We probably won't have our first hearing until sometime in late February, maybe early March. On the other side of the aisle, they actually still haven't appointed their committee memberships. And because they're in the majority, until that happens, we won't have committee hearings because the chairman is the one or chairwoman is the one who will
Call the
hearing. We're looking forward to it, but have to wait. And then the Commissioner of Revenue will come in and present the revenue situation as he sees it, which I'm looking forward to. But yeah, there's two different theories. And then as you just mentioned, the state pension system, has a fund at one point was about $75 billion and $74 billion. And today it's 69 point something billion. And then they just announced the $4.9 billion loss, which is a lot of change.
December hurt so many of us.
And that's what that's all about. I'm sure when we look at the next month is probably going to be up $4 or
when
$5
you think
billion.
of 2008, the people who jumped and started reacting
Yeah,
then missed the kickback.
right.
So, a year or two later, you're back on track.
Yeah,
So, when I read $5 billion loss, what I want to know is why?
yeah,
Is it the dip?
right.
And now, first couple weeks in the January numbers looked really good.
Yeah. I remember hearing a story from 2008-9 that the state treasury lost $700 million in 1 hour. And that was due to companies failing and the economy the way it was. So,
Well, see, I've always known I have a foolproof way of affecting my portfolio. I get involved, it goes down.
yeah, right.
There's reasons that you have professional money managers
Right.
who spend every minute of every day trying to make a lot of money because then I make money too.
Right. Yep, exactly.
But for me to try and outguess the computers and Wells Fargo and all the big banks,
Yep.
yeah, I never. Luckily, I do it as a hobby, kind of on paper,
Oh, yeah. Yep.
to say, okay, if I was managing this, no, I think I'll leave it alone.
Yep. Yep. I've been
But
there.
how's it looking? I mean, to me, short-term blip, I can live with.
Yeah, and I think you got to look over the course of several months. I mean, of the last year, 10 of those 12 months we've been above benchmark for
Right.
tax collections. We have $1 billion budget surplus, that's been deposited into the rainy day fund essentially. Things are seemingly going well. Unemployment numbers are at the lowest in Massachusetts history. The amount of people working are at their highest. Income tax collections were high. Sales tax collections were high. It was the capital gains and the withholdings, corporate income tax withholdings that were lower. And that just seems to be that corporations are taking advantage of certain laws that were passed on the federal level and carrying it over.
But eventually, I mean, I can defer, but the chickens are going to come home to roost eventually.
Yes, there's no question. And
I mean,
that's why you put money away for a
But I
rainy
can
day.
defer, and I can defer, but eventually,
Yeah.
I got to pay.
Yeah, exactly. And that probably, I mean, we typically see May and June be the highest tax collecting months because April your taxes are due, and that's how it all plays out. The governor has proposed his budget. It's H1. It's the first step in the budget process. It was $42.7 billion. I was honestly a little disappointed. Like the governor very much. Think he's done a really good job for the state. Things that disappointed me. He's a selectman, former selectman, served a term in Swampscott. I wish he would prioritize local services a little bit more. Don't forget the last budget was $41 billion. We just jumped $2.7 billion in this budget, and I believe it was a $200 million increase to education and a $30 million increase to unrestricted general government aid. That's not a lot of money relative to the rest of the spending. He proposed the tax increase on the house excise tax up a point. So the valuation we do for every $500 of value, that's a 2% increase or a 2% tax. He's proposed going to 3%. My problem with that is a lot of young people in Massachusetts and perhaps some older people in Massachusetts who are trying to downsize. That hits you pretty hard. Hits you hard when you're trying to start a family. At the closing costs, all of a sudden you're told instead of owing $1,200, you owe $2,400, and that's significant. That money spent in other,
especially the people who are right at the brink of trying to make it.
Yep.
With the down payments and.
Yep. And then on the other side of the equation, older people trying to downsize. That's a significant amount of money that they could use to live their life in retirement. Not happy about that. I think the thing that really gets me more than anything with that particular tax increase is it's supposed to go for climate mitigation and adaptation issues, which I think are important, but at the same time, I'm not sure that burden should fall on just people who are buying homes. I don't really understand the logic behind that. Secondly, it's going into a fund where the vast majority of climate mitigation problems and adaptation problems are on Cape Cod, the North Shore, the South Shore area, the coastal communities. How does that work for Central Mass? So you're basically transferring geographical wealth. I don't like that. I don't think that that's fair. I think that if you're going to justify a tax, you got to, first of all, have a good justification for it. And second, people in your area that are paying it need to benefit from it. I've always said, I'm not a tax guy. I think government should be small. I think small government provides freedom and opportunity. And I think the more money in somebody's pocket is better because I think they know how to spend it. Yeah, than people who are elected in Boston. And I'm probably going to learn a whole heck of a lot more about that serving on Ways and Means. But, I do know that everybody acknowledges that, taxes are a necessary thing to educate our populace, to protect our society.
But you're onto something, because you think about the north-south axis versus east-west.
Right.
If we were ever to look at the Mass Pike, I don't think anybody could argue that we're not paying more than our fair share living out in Metro West.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no question about it.
You start thinking about, well, the MBTA and this, okay, but what benefit do we get that you're keeping the tolls going on the Mass Pike?
Yeah. And not only that, but like state aid for schools. In Boston, you're seeing $24, per student.
Oh, please, when I see 47% of, the funds that we spend on students being taken care of by the state, and other cities are getting 60 and 70%.
Yeah.
Candidly, it's like, wait a minute, you're supposed to reward me if I do well. So why is it that Milford always gets the short end of the stick on funding?
Yeah.
Because you don't need it.
Right. Well, and this is where I get a little bit frustrated, with this governor's budget. First time I've ever been frustrated by his budgets. I think for the most part, when he's proposed them over the last 4 years, let's not take away anything from him. He came in, had $1 billion budget deficit. Next year it was a $500 million one. So this is a guy who has handled a lot of challenges, had to make tough decisions. And so in those tough decisions, I thought good decisions were made. And now I'm seeing a situation where we have money and we're spending it significantly more than we were, which makes me nervous for that rainy day down the road, though we have put away money. And we're also asking people from the central and western part of the state to pay for something
For a
that
lot
they have.
on the east.
Exactly. And we already do that. You know, we do a lot of that right now. And I just don't think that that's fair. So, you know, these are the things that I've been thinking a lot about with the governor's budget and now being on Ways and Means with the ability to add my voice to that conversation when we create the state Senate budget. I'm hoping that there'll be a reflection upon sort of that idea of geographical equity because the central part of the state is the heart of the state and it should be treated well.
But there's a lot more people who vote on the east part of the state.
Yeah, well, there's a lot more people who voted for the governor in this part of the state, and I think he needs to remember that.
And overall, I think I've been very pleased with what he's done.
Yeah, yeah.
But it doesn't mean this is not us voting dogma saying, well, the governor said it, so we have to support it.
Yeah.
I think it's healthy to come back and say, you know, hey, by the way, like when Deval Patrick came out and stumping for his $2 billion increase.
Right, yeah.
And I remember asking him saying, will any of that money pass the the corridor? 128.
Yeah, 128.
Does anything go
495,
out to 495 and,
yeah.
you know, kind of travel down 290?
Yeah.
And, you know, you get the line, of course, and it's like, yeah, well, it doesn't feel that way all the time.
Yeah, I know. And that's, I think, a problem. I always joke, you know, once I get to Worcester County, people think I'm in New York. I've never forgotten going into a restaurant, a chain restaurant, you know, lunch type place in Boston. And I asked the guy, do you have any locations out in Central Mass? And he goes, oh yeah, we got one in Wellesley. And I'm like, come on, man.
Yes.
You know, got to do better than that.
That was the Mass Life Science. We had a networking group, and we invited one of the executives to come out. And sure enough, one of the people from Microtest out in Agawam asked a question. Now, these new programs you're rolling out for biotech, are they only for inside 128? And without blinking, she went, oh no, we go out to Western Mass. I mean, as far as Worcester. I had to look at him and it's like, don't say it.
Yeah, right.
Please, because after the meeting is Western Mass, yeah. Worcester.
I know. Everything's relative.
You got to keep plugging and fighting the good fight.
Absolutely.
Good to have you on such influential committees, and congratulations.
Yeah,
it's only term 3.
It's exciting for sure, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm privileged to earned a second term, and I was very happy to win Milford, and hopefully can continue to work hard for the community.
And as always, thanks for joining. To our 6 loyal viewers, may God bless, and may tomorrow be a better day than today. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Not too long since I've been home.